I never expected my first interstellar diplomatic mission to end with me being betrothed to an alien princess. But here I was, standing in the grandiose Hall of Elders on the planet Zelvaris, trying to process what had just happened. It had all started so simply. The United Terran Federation had sent me, Commander Jason Hale, as a representative to establish formal relations with the Zelvarians, a proud and advanced race known for their intricate social customs and rigid hierarchy. Our goal was to foster trade, cultural exchange, and perhaps even military alliances. I had spent months preparing for this mission, studying everything we knew about Zelvarian customs. But apparently, there was one crucial detail that our intelligence had missed. When I arrived at the royal palace, an architectural marvel of gleaming crystal spires and cascading waterfalls of bioluminescent liquid, I was ushered into the throne room. The Zelvarian king, a towering figure clad in shimmering robes of iridescent silk, sat on an ornate throne, his gaze piercing and unreadable. Beside him stood Princess Kiara. Unlike her father, who radiated an air of unapproachable authority, she had an almost ethereal beauty. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, adorned with delicate golden patterns that shimmered as she moved. Her silver eyes held an intelligence that was both sharp and curious. I had been briefed on how important it was to make a good impression, and I was determined not to make any missteps. So when the princess stepped forward and extended her hand, I did what any human would do. I shook it. The silence that followed was deafening. The murmurs of the gathered nobles died instantly. The air in the room became heavy, charged with an almost tangible tension. The king's expression turned from serene to something closer to shock, then fury. I withdrew my hand, suddenly very aware that I had just done something incredibly wrong. My stomach twisted into knots. The king rose to his full height, his ornate robes billowing around him. His deep, resonant voice thundered across the hall. By the sacred customs of Zelvaris, the act has been witnessed. The bond is sealed. I blinked. I'm sorry, what? Princess Kiara's silver eyes widened and a faint blush colored her cheeks. I wasn't sure if it was embarrassment or something else. One of the royal advisors, an elderly Zelvarian with a crest of golden horns, stepped forward and cleared his throat. Ambassador Hale, you have performed the Jalthera, the binding. Handshake. It is the ancient ritual of courtship among our people. By taking the princess's hand, you have declared your intent to father her heirs and unite your lineage with the royal family. I nearly choked. Excuse me? The king's expression remained grim. You are now bound by honor to fulfill the sacred duty. My mind raced. This had to be a joke, right? Some kind of weird alien hazing ritual? I turned to my own delegation, but they looked just as bewildered as I felt. Your Majesty, I said carefully, my diplomatic instincts kicking in. I assure you I meant no offense. Where I come from, a handshake is simply a form of greeting, a gesture of goodwill. The king's gaze was like stone. On Zelvaris, it is the promise of a future. I ran a hand through my hair, trying not to panic. Okay, let's take a step back. Surely there's a way to, I don't know, undo this? A ripple of scandalized gasps echoed through the chamber. Princess Kiara, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Her voice was calm but firm. The Jalthera is sacred. It cannot be undone. I looked at her, searching for any sign that she was as horrified by this as I was. Instead, I found an expression of quiet resignation, maybe even amusement. The king continued, his voice unwavering. You will undergo the binding ceremony at the next full cycle. The union will be solidified, and the first steps of the lineage will begin. I swayed slightly. When you say, first steps of the lineage, you mean? The king's eyes gleamed. You will father the future heirs of Zelvaris, as is custom. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to stave off the migraine forming behind my eyes. I don't suppose there's a clause for diplomatic misunderstandings. The golden-horned advisor gave me a sympathetic look. Such a thing has never occurred before. Of course it hadn't. I took a deep breath. All right, So what happens if I don't go through with this? The room fell eerily silent again. I had the distinct feeling that I had just asked if I could set fire to their most sacred temple. The king's expression darkened. To break the Jalthera is to dishonor the royal bloodline. It would be considered an act of great insult. One that could lead to war between our peoples. I swallowed hard. Great. Just great. I had come here to negotiate peace and trade deals, not to get engaged to an alien princess under the threat of interstellar conflict. Princess Kiara sighed softly. I understand this is unexpected for you, Commander Hale. It was unexpected for me as well. But the customs of my people are clear. You are now my betrothed. I turned to her, desperate for any way out of this. And how do you feel about this? Her silver eyes met mine, unreadable, but not unkind. I have always known my fate would be tied to duty rather than choice. If you were Zelvarian, this would not be questioned. I exhaled slowly. Well, I'm not Zelvarian, I'm human, and on Earth marriage is something people agree to, voluntarily. She tilted her head slightly. And yet, you took my hand. Willingly. I groaned inwardly. This was a nightmare. The king clapped his hands and 2 attendants in flowing robes stepped forward. The preparations shall begin at once. The binding ceremony will be held in 3 days. 3 days? My voice nearly cracked. The king nodded. You will be escorted to the royal quarters to prepare. 2 Zelvarian guards stepped forward, their ornate armor gleaming in the chamber's ethereal glow. I had the distinct impression that escorting was more of a you're coming whether you like it or not kind of situation. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Well, I suppose saying no thanks is out of the question. The guards didn't answer. They just started leading me away. As I was guided down the grand corridors of the palace, I glanced at Princess Kiara one last time. She was watching me, with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Was that sympathy? Amusement? Curiosity? One thing was certain. This was going to be a long 3 days. I had always thought that diplomatic disasters involved things like failing to bow properly, mispronouncing a monarch's name, or accidentally insulting a sacred tradition. Apparently here on Zelvaris, a simple handshake was enough to ruin my life. I sat in my new quarters, my royal quarters as the guards had pointedly informed me, staring at the intricate crystalline ceiling. The room was massive, with walls made of shimmering blue stone that pulsed faintly as if alive. Delicate silver tapestries adorned with strange, alien symbols hung from the walls. A massive bed, large enough to fit 3 of me, occupied one side of the chamber. I should have been awed by the luxury. Instead, I was too busy panicking. The doors were guarded. I wasn't exactly a prisoner, but I had the feeling that if I tried to leave, I'd be gently but firmly reminded of my new obligations. I needed to think. I stood up and started pacing. There had to be a way out of this. Maybe I could appeal to the king again, convince him that this was all a mistake, or perhaps I could find some loophole in their laws. There had to be something. Before I could come up with a plan, the doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Princess Kiara stepped inside. I froze. She was dressed differently now, wearing a flowing, white robe adorned with golden embroidery. Her silver eyes studied me with an unreadable expression. I see you have not tried to escape, she said, a hint of amusement in her tone. Would it have worked if I had, I countered. She smiled faintly. No. Great. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Listen, Princess. Kiara, she corrected. Fine. Kiara, you seem like a reasonable person, so maybe you can help me understand something. Is there really no way out of this? I mean, I don't want to insult your people, but this was an honest mistake. Kiara tilted her head. If you had made this mistake with a commoner, there might have been a way to nullify the bond. But with me? She shook her head. I am the heir to the throne, Jason. My unions are bound by law and tradition. There is no reversing a Jalthera once it has been publicly witnessed. I groaned. You're telling me there's no ancient precedent for accidents? Kiara pursed her lips, thinking. There are challenges, but they are unwise. I perked up. Challenges? Like what? She hesitated. One who wishes to break a Jalthera may request the trial of honor. I didn't like the sound of that. And what does that involve? Kiara sighed. You would have to face 3 trials, each designed to test your worthiness as a mate for the royal family. If you fail, you are dishonored and exiled from Zelvaris, assuming you survive. I blinked. Wait, survive? She nodded solemnly. I let out a hollow laugh. So my options are marry you or risk death. Essentially, I stared at her. You said that way too calmly. Kiara gave me an appraising look. You are a warrior, are you not? A commander of your people? Yeah, but we don't exactly settle diplomatic issues with gladiator matches. She chuckled softly. Our traditions are different from yours, but if you are truly unwilling to go through with this union, the trials are your only path. I rubbed my temples. This was ridiculous. Okay, I said. Let's put the death trials on hold for a second. What if we pretend to go through with the ceremony, and then later, quietly, end the engagement? Kiara arched a delicate eyebrow. Are you suggesting we deceive my father, the king of Zelvaris? Would he even notice? I asked, grasping at straws. Maybe we can... Kiara shook her head. The binding ceremony is not merely symbolic. It involves a sacred ritual that links our life forces. It cannot be undone without consequences. I frowned. What kind of consequences? She hesitated. If the bond is broken improperly, it could cause instability, a loss of standing for my family, or worse, it could create an imbalance in the energy flows of Zelvaris itself. I stared at her. You're telling me that if we don't get married, your planet could suffer? Kiara met my gaze seriously. That is a possibility, yes. I wanted to scream. Before I could, the door opened again, and the king's advisor, the golden-horned elder, stepped inside. Your Majesty, Princess Kiara, he greeted, bowing deeply. The king requests your presence. The final arrangements for the binding ceremony must be discussed. Kiara nodded. We will be there shortly. The advisor left without another word. I exhaled, sharply. This is insane. Kiara studied me, her expression unreadable once more. Perhaps, but it is our way. I shook my head. I don't suppose you have any objections to this whole mess. She hesitated. I do not know you, Jason, and I did not expect my betrothed to be a human, but I have been raised to understand my duty. If this is my fate, then I will embrace it. Ran a hand down my face. I wish I had your confidence. She smiled just slightly. Then perhaps you should trust me. I looked at her, really looked at her. Kiara was composed, intelligent, and far too calm about all of this. She wasn't the problem here. This damn tradition was. I sighed. All right, I'll talk to the king, but if I don't like what I hear, I might have to take my chances with those trials. Kiara's silver eyes gleamed. Then I will ensure you have a fighting chance. I had no idea what that meant. But somehow, I knew that my life was about to get even more complicated. I had spent my entire life preparing for duty. As the heir to the Zelvarian throne, I had been trained in governance, diplomacy, warfare, and tradition since childhood. I had memorized the names and deeds of every ruler before me, studied the intricacies of interstellar politics, and accepted that my future, my very existence, was tied to the well-being of my people. But never had I imagined that my fate would be sealed by a simple handshake. Jason Hale was not what I expected. The humans we had encountered before were either coldly professional or overly eager to impress. They spoke carefully, hiding their true intentions behind polite smiles. Jason, however, was different. He was blunt, expressive, and utterly unprepared for what had happened. I could see the panic in his eyes when my father invoked the Jalthera. At first I had thought he was merely overwhelmed, but as he spoke, as he argued and pleaded his case, I realized something unexpected. He genuinely had no idea what he had done. Had he been Zelvarian, his reaction would have been an outrage, insulting even. To suggest that the Jalthera was a mistake was to spit in the face of tradition. Yet I found myself feeling something close to amusement as he fumbled for a way out. Humans, it seemed, had very different ways of choosing their mates. And yet, I could not afford to take this lightly. The Jalthera was more than a simple promise. It was an ancient pact, one intertwined with the balance of Zelvaris itself. It was said that the energy of the planet responded to the union of the royal bloodline, strengthening the harmony of our world. To break it would not just dishonor my family, it could bring chaos, which meant Jason had a choice: accept the bond and father the next generation of rulers, or challenge fate itself. The thought was almost laughable. He was strong, yes, I had seen reports of his military achievements. He had fought in wars, led troops into battle, and survived against impossible odds. But the trials of honor were not mere tests of combat. They were trials of spirit, endurance, and above all, understanding of what it meant to rule. No human had ever faced them. I doubted he would survive. But then again, I had never met anyone quite like Jason Hale. The King's ultimatum. We arrived at the Royal Council chamber where my father was waiting. The room was vast, its domed ceiling displaying shifting constellations above us, a representation of our place in the universe. My father stood at the center, flanked by advisors and elders. Jason squared his shoulders, his face carefully neutral. He was trying to hide his frustration, but I could see the tension in his jaw. The King wasted no time. "Have you come to accept your duty, human?" Jason let out a slow breath. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, I still don't believe this is fair. I had no idea what I was doing. You're asking me to change my entire life because of a handshake." One of the elders gasped in offense. My father's expression darkened. "The Jalthera is not to be taken lightly," he said sternly. "You stand at a crossroads, Jason Hale. You may embrace the bond, or you may face the trials of honor. There is no other path." Jason exhaled through his nose. "Fine. Then tell me, what exactly do these trials involve?" The golden-horned advisor stepped forward. "The trials of honor consist of 3 challenges. The first is the trial of strength, where you will face the guardian of the sacred arena in combat." Jason gave me a sideways glance. I could already tell he was thinking, "Okay, that one doesn't sound too bad." "The second," the advisor continued, "is the trial of wisdom. You will be placed in the maze of truth where you must find your way using only knowledge and intuition." Jason frowned. "And the third?" "The trial of devotion," my father said. "Oh, test of sacrifice, where you must prove your willingness to put Zelvaris above yourself." Jason hesitated. I could tell the first 2 didn't scare him, but the third, that one was unknown. He was a soldier, not a ruler. He was used to fighting battles, but dedicating his life to a cause that wasn't his own, that was another matter entirely. "How long do I have to prepare?" Jason asked. 3 days, my father replied. Jason let out a short laugh. "Of course, because why give me time to actually train?" "It is tradition," the King said simply. Jason looked at me. "And you? What do you think?" I met his gaze. "I think you are a fool for choosing this path, but I also think you are too stubborn to do otherwise." He smirked slightly. "You're not wrong." I sighed. "Very well, then I will help you." That surprised him. "You will?" I nodded. "You are my betrothed, Jason. Whether you succeed or fail reflects upon me as well. If you insist on taking the trials, then I will make sure you do not embarrass me." Jason chuckled. "Well, when you put it that way, how can I refuse?" Training for the impossible over the next 3 days, I did everything I could to prepare Jason for the trials. For the trial of strength, I took him to the royal training grounds, where I introduced him to Zelvarian combat techniques. He was skilled. His movements were precise, efficient. But the guardian of the sacred arena was no ordinary opponent. It was an ancient construct, a fusion of technology and tradition designed to test warriors beyond their limits. Great, Jason muttered after narrowly dodging one of my strikes. So I'm fighting a death robot. An honorable death construct, I corrected. Fantastic. For the trial of wisdom, I guided him through the teachings of our ancestors, explaining the philosophy behind the maze of truth. It was not merely a physical labyrinth, but a mental one, filled with illusions and deceptions meant to test one's ability to see beyond the obvious. This is going to suck, Jason groaned as he tried to decipher an ancient riddle. Most likely, I agreed. But it was the third trial that worried me the most. The trial of devotion was the most unpredictable of all. It was different for each participant, tailored to their deepest fears and desires. No one knew what Jason would face, not even me. As the final night before the trials approached, we stood on one of the palace balconies, overlooking the glowing city below. Jason sighed. You know, if I survive this, I still might end up married. To you, I smirked. Indeed. And if I fail? I hesitated, then said quietly, then I will mourn you. He turned to me, something unreadable in his expression. Well, when you put it like that, I guess I'd better not fail. I looked out at the stars, feeling something unexpected stir within me. For the first time, I wondered, what if fate had chosen him for a reason? Jason stood in the heart of the sacred arena, his pulse steady, his body coiled with readiness. The massive coliseum of dark obsidian stretched high into the sky, its walls adorned with glowing glyphs that pulsed with an ancient energy. Thousands of Zelvarians watched in silent anticipation from the elevated stands, their shimmering eyes reflecting the light of the twin moons above. Across from him, the guardian of the sacred arena stepped forward. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, its body a fusion of sleek metallic plating and living crystal. Its limbs glowed with raw energy, and in its hands, it held a colossal blade that hummed with power. Jason rolled his shoulders and exhaled. Of course, it has a giant sword. Princess Kiara, seated in the royal box above, had spent the past 3 days trying to prepare him for this. But no amount of training could fully prepare someone for the sheer brutality of a Zelvarian combat. Trial. The gong sounded. The guardian moved like lightning despite its massive size. It lunged, bringing its blade down in a devastating arc. Jason dodged to the side, rolling across the black stone floor as the sword smashed into the ground, sending shockwaves through the arena. He's fast, Kiara murmured, watching intently. Jason knew he couldn't overpower the guardian. Instead, he relied on his agility and instincts. He weaved between its attacks, striking at exposed joints, testing its reflexes. But the guardian was relentless. A sudden backhand strike caught Jason in the ribs, sending him sprawling. He coughed, tasting blood. The crowd murmured. Kiara clenched her fists. "Get up, Jason," she whispered. Jason pushed himself up. He had fought impossible odds before. He wasn't about to die here. When the guardian came at him again, he was ready. Instead of dodging, he stepped in, ducking under the massive blade and driving his elbow into the exposed core of its chest. Energy rippled outward, but this time, Jason didn't retreat. He pressed forward, using the guardian's own momentum against it. With a final explosive effort, Jason twisted, slamming his opponent into the ground. The guardian's lights flickered. Then, with a mechanical groan, it went still. Silence. Then the arena erupted in cheers. Jason lay there for a moment, panting. Then he grinned and muttered, "One down. The maze of truth." The second trial took Jason deep into the maze of truth, an ancient structure buried beneath the royal palace. The labyrinth was designed to test wisdom, intuition, and the ability to discern deception from reality. The moment Jason stepped inside, the walls shimmered, shifting and rearranging themselves. The temperature dropped, and whispers filled the air. Kiara had warned him that the maze would pull from his subconscious, confronting him with illusions designed to confuse, distract, and even tempt him. He moved cautiously, keeping one hand against the cold stone wall, The passages twisted unpredictably, shifting with every step. Then, suddenly, he was no longer in a maze. He was back on Earth. The air smelled of rain. He stood on a battlefield, the ruins of a city around him. Smoke curled into the sky. Jason knew this memory. It was the Battle of New Geneva. The day he had made a choice that cost lives. The day he had lost people under his command. He turned, and there they were, his fallen comrades, their eyes accusing, their voices filled with disappointment. You left us, Jason. You could have saved us. Do you even deserve to live? Jason clenched his fists. He knew this wasn't real. It couldn't be real, but it felt real. Then another voice joined the whispers. A familiar one. Kiara's. Truth is not in the past. Truth is in the choice you make now, Jason exhaled sharply. This isn't real, he said aloud. I can't change the past. I can only move forward. The illusion wavered. Jason took a step. Then another. The whispers faded. The battlefield vanished, replaced by the final stretch of the maze. He had passed. The trial of devotion. The third trial was the most mysterious. Jason was led to a secluded chamber where the king and the council waited. Kiara stood at the edge of the room, her expression unreadable. The golden-horned advisor spoke. The final trial is a test of sacrifice. You must prove your devotion to Zelvaris and its future. The test is different for every challenger. Your choice will determine your fate. A pedestal rose from the floor. Upon it, two objects appeared. On one side, a ceremonial dagger. On the other, a glowing crystal, pulsating with raw energy. Jason frowned. What's the choice? The king spoke gravely. You may take the dagger and sever the bond between you and Kiara. This will free you from all obligation. You will leave Zelvaris unharmed, but your name will be forgotten, and the bond will be lost forever. Jason's throat felt dry. And the crystal? The golden-horned advisor gestured. By taking the crystal, you will accept your place at Kiara's side. The bond will be sealed. Your life will be bound to Zelvaris. There will be no turning back. Silence. Jason looked at Kiara. Her expression was calm, but he saw the tension in her eyes. This was the moment. He could leave. He could go back to Earth. He could be free. But he thought about everything he had been through. The battles, the trials, the way Kiara had stood beside him, teaching him, guiding him. He thought about the way she looked at him, not as an outsider, but as someone who could belong. Jason exhaled. Then he reached out and took the crystal. A new future. The chamber was silent for a heartbeat. Then the crystal flared with golden light. The energy surged through Jason, filling him with warmth, with certainty. The bond was sealed. The king nodded in approval. It is done. Kiara stepped forward, her silver eyes searching his. You chose Zelvaris. Jason smirked. I chose you. Small, rare smile touched her lips. The council erupted in cheers, and the fate of Zelvaris was secured. Jason Hale had arrived as a stranger. But now he was something more. Not just a warrior, not just an outsider. He was the future king. And as he stood beside Kiara, watching the stars above, he realized, maybe fate had known what it was doing all along.